This conference will now be recorded.
As a last class, we had discussed a few things about autosclerosis. So we'll just I'll make a brief recap. So autosclerosis is a disease of the endochondral layer of the otic capsule. So even though it is a disease of the bony labyrinth, it can cause conductive hearing loss. Now, it is a genetically inherited disease having autosomal dominant inheritance with incomplete penetrance, and also it is associated in certain syndromes like Van der Hoek syndrome, where there is a triad of blue sclera, osteogenesis imperfecta, and autosclerosis. Uh, Commonly seen in females, the ratio being 2:1, and is the triggering factor are mostly pregnancy and menopause. And typically, the patients presents to us or to the ENT surgeon with a hearing loss, which is progressive over the period of time, and the patient has trouble hearing or converse or communicating in home. When he or she is outside, they feel the hearing is okay. So this is particularly known as Barrack-Wills and this is one of very important say, symptoms which the autosclerosis patient presents to us. Now, differential diagnosis, there are a lot of disease which can mimic autosclerosis like Paget's disease, and then you have a otitis media with effusion, ossicular chain discontinuity. So all these conditions, apart from Paget's disease where you have sensory neural hearing loss, in otitis media with effusion, and in case of ossicular chain dislocation or disruption, you will have conductive hearing loss. But basically, in this condition, the tympanic membrane appears to be normal in a established autosclerosis. Now, there are different foci from where the autosclerosis may arise. The most common foci being anterior to the plate, that is called fistula ante-fenestrum. The next common foci is it can involve the area posterior to the foot plate area, that is called fistula post-fenestrum. And in some cases it may involve only the foot plate area, so in which the foot plate becomes very thick, and this is known as a biscuit type of autosclerosis. It can also involve the round windows, but the involvement of round window does not usually result with any sort of hearing loss, unless and until the autosclerotic foci completely obliterates the round window niche. Then you can have sort of sensory neural as well as conductive hearing loss. But even though a minute opening is present where the foci has not involved, can lead to, and this sort of patient won't have any hearing loss complaints. So these are the different foci, and depending on the site, you have the classification. If you go to the classification of autosclerosis, I have already told you fistula ante-fenestrum, fistula post-fenestrum, biscuit type of autosclerosis. Then you have another is a obliterative type of autosclerosis, where it is very difficult even to make out where is the foot plate area loose. And then you have the autosclerosis involving the round window, where this is known as the cochlear otosclerosis. So these are the different classification of otosclerosis. And here what happens key, the bone remodeling takes place. The bone remodeling occurs. So bone being absorbed and as well as laid down simultaneously. So what happens ki the normal lamellar bone of the bony labyrinth is replaced by spongy bone of increased vascularity, increased cellularity. So this is the till now what uh, we had discussed in the last class. So now coming to the surgery, the treatment, we had just started the treatment. The treatment mostly is surgical, but in certain cases, you have to rely on the medicinal part. And like medicinal or what you say, conservative treatment, mostly in the form of a hearing aid, or you can also give sodium fluoride. Sodium fluoride, I told you, causes maturation of the lesion. So a immature lesion is called, or a early lesion is called otospongiosis, and the established lesion is called otosclerosis. So when in the stage of otospongiosis, you do examination of the tympanic membrane, it gives us a pinkish hue, and that is known as a flamingo pink sign or Schwarz sign. Schwarz sign or flamingo pink sign. This pinkish hue is nothing but increased vascularity over the promontory. There is increased vascularity over the promontory, and these blood vessels impart a pinkish hue on the tympanic membrane. So the sodium fluoride, what it does, it converts the otospongiotic foci to otosclerotic foci. So thereby it causes maturation, early maturation, and also it also plays an important role in restricting the lesion. So when it becomes mature, no, then there is no more bony remodeling. So thereby it also to some extent restricts the extent of lesion. Now, in these conditions, you are seeing where you should not go for a surgery. Like if the patient is above 70 years of age, and if the otosclerosis is there in the only hearing ear, the other ear is totally dead, in pregnancy, or when you have a cochlear otosclerosis or a stapedial otosclerosis with poor airborne gap. In case of sportsmen, particularly if a person is a weightlifter, then it's definitely not advisable, or a diver, or in those, particularly in those individuals, better not to do. And poor speech discrimination score and recent history of vertigo. So these are the condition where it is better off you rely on either most likely a hearing aid. So that will give more benefit to the patient, because uh, this surgery which we do for otosclerosis, there is an inherent risk of injury to the inner ear. So you have to be careful in selecting the cases. So how to select the case? Whenever a patient comes to you, and remember, the bilateral disease is more common in females, and unilateral disease is more common in males. So always remember, in female it is usually bilateral. And so when a patient comes to you with hearing loss, he or she is a female, married with children, then most likely you are dealing with a case of otosclerosis. If you find the tympanic membrane is perfectly normal, and there is no history of tinnitus, only hearing loss, and it is slowly progressing over a period of time. And then when you do the routine examination, you find the tympanic membrane is absolutely normal. And then you do a movement of the tympanic membrane is also normal with Siegel speculum. And then you go ahead with the tuning fork test and find out that it is a conductive hearing loss. So and Rene is negative, Weber is lateralized to the poor ear, absolute bone conduction is normal. Then you do one test that's called the Gale test. So the Gale test, how it is done, here you have to you require one assistant. So you take a 512 hertz tuning fork, and then after hitting the tuning fork over a hard surface, you put the tuning fork over the mastoid, and with the and then the patient will start to appreciate from the tuning tone of the. Then you insert a Siegel speculum, pneumatic speculum, which is tightly fitting into the external auditory canal, and then you manipulate the pressure by pressing the and releasing the bulb. So what happens in normal person, no, where there is no fixation of the ossicular chain or foot plate, uh, the patient will, when you press the Siegel speculum, no, or you impart a positive pressure, the hearing comes down, and then when you release the pressure, the hearing goes up. So there will be a up and down of the intensity of the sound. But in case of otosclerosis or in case of ossicular chain fixation or ossicular chain, it is difficult to appreciate, and they will say no, the sound is same all through, there is no up and down, and it's gradually, slowly it is decreasing. So this indicates a positive Gale test, and that is highly suspicious of ossicular chain sclerosis. So it's not, you cannot stamp the case as otosclerosis. Okay, so without opening the without doing a what you say, a tympanotomy, looking into the middle ear cavity. So what happens key in case of prolonged otosclerosis, no, because the malleus and incus are also not functioning, there is certain amount of ankylosis of the incudostapedial joint as well as the incudomalleolar joint, certain degree of ankylosis because of disuse leg. They are not used for a long time because of the fixation of foot plate. So there is ankylosis of incudostapedial as well as incudomalleolar joint. So always be careful when you are dealing with such case. Don't just think in one direction. You have to keep a open mind approach. So the most effective treatment for otosclerosis is surgery. And last class I think we had discussed the surgery had evolved over a long period of time, starting with the initial phase of mobilization, where the anterior crura of the foot plate is mobilized using a small delicate instrument. And post, what happens when this mobilization is done, whatever little bit of ankylosis was there, or that gets released, and the patient appreciates improvement in hearing. So that was the mobilization era. The mobilization era was, then what happened ki, immediately after a few months or years, the patient again develops the same problem. So that means again slowly the ankylosis develops, or the stapedial otosclerosis foci again takes the precedence. And then the mobilization era ended, and then the fenestration era started. The fenestra, where you make a small opening in the lateral semicircular canal. So this is due to for a proper hearing, you need two functional windows. So in order to have two functional window, so you know the oval window is not functioning, the round window is functioning. So what they do, they make another opening or window in the lateral semicircular canal, and then the sound is transmitted bypassing the oval window. Then the era came of stapedectomy, where what they did key, they removed the whole superstructure as well as the footplate. And after removal of that, one graft was placed because now it is open. You can see the inner ear very clearly. So one fascia or vein, you can keep it, and then you put the piston over it. So you put a piston over it and connect it to the incus. So the stapedectomy era started, and was the father of stapes surgery, Dr. John Shea. He is known as the father of modern stapes surgery. So he advocated the uh, stapedectomy, and then the stapedectomy, initially the whole footplate was removed. Then they tried to preserve some part of the, because you see most cases the um, foci lies anterior to the footplate, so that is called the fistula antefenestrum. So here the foci starts just anterior to the oval round oval window, and then slowly so in that what happened, the posterior half of the footplate is not inward, so you can make a opening, or you can what you can do is they break the footplate area into two half, anterior half and posterior half, and in the posterior half they keep the piston, because the anterior half is already involved by the footplate, by the disease. So they remove the footplate and only the posterior half, and then put a graft, and then put the piston. So what happened key with this surgery, sometimes what happens key, when you are fracturing the footplate, no, it some of the footplate pieces breaks and goes into the inner ear. So that can be that can cause a complication, and sometimes even there is a perilimb fistula also. So and there was an increased incidence of sensory neural hearing loss, because in some cases the perilymph came out and suction was done. So all these things gave rise to the stepidotomy. So stepidotomy is just making a hole in the foot plate. So and then now they are advocating a small fenestra stepidotomy, means making a still a smaller opening on the foot plate. So whenever you remember the stepidotomy is done, it is done in the posterior half of the foot plate. Why? Because the anterior half of the foot plate, the is the sacularia, which lies very close to the anterior half of the foot plate. That is maybe hardly a distance of zero point 0.1 millimeter. Whereas in the posterior half, no, the vestibule lies little away from the foot plate area. So you have a little potential space to work on. So that is how you avoid injury to the delicate membranous labyrinth. So they very very important. You see, this patient should be fully informed about uncertainties and risk of operation. So you see, there are a lot of things like everything. The whole surgery will go on well, and still patient may land up with facial nerve palsy, or patient may land up with extensive granulations and causing total deafness of the ear. You cannot predict. You cannot predict. So you have to inform the patient about uncertainties, and also you have to tell the patient that be prepared for a totally deaf ear. If things doesn't go wrong, if things go wrong, then you may land up with total hearing loss. So this has to be not only told verbally, but should be documented, and patient, and not only patient, one or two attenders also should sign as a risk bond, like a risk bond. Written disclosure of the risk and result should be signed by the patient. Taste may be affected because a chorda tympani nerve injury is possible, and this what happens key, this varicella zoster infection, if the patient might have suffered in childhood, the virus may be in the there in the chorda tympani, because it in the chorda tympani nerve. The moment you have not touched the facial nerve, the moment you try to, because you have to move the chorda tympani nerve, so you have to manipulate the chorda tympani nerve. The moment you manipulate the chorda tympani nerve, the varicella zoster virus is released, and this can cause facial nerve palsy. But in majority of cases, the facial nerve palsies improve, almost comes to normal within a month time. But in some cases, it may not come. So always you should inform. Post-operative dizziness will be there. Definitely, you are inserting one foreign body into the inner ear, that will cause some amount of localized labyrinthitis. So dizziness will be there. So facial nerve palsy is a possible complication seen in less than 1% of cases, and begins 5 to 7 days after surgery. So edema of the nerve in the fallopian canal as a result of activation of herpes infection in the chorda tympani and facial nerve by trauma of operation. So this is one yeah. Other one is, sometimes you might encounter a dehiscent facial nerve, and this facial nerve will fall and cover almost the foot plate area. So in this condition, whenever if you want to still go ahead and do the stepidotomy, you have to push the facial nerve away. Sorry, you have to push the facial nerve away from the operation area, and then you make the opening. So this minimum handling of the facial nerve can also cause palsy. And another thing you remember, if there is a dehiscent fallopian canal, and there is a fallopian and there is facial nerve palsy, and then if you're doing a revision case of stepidotomy, then there is highly chance that you might injure the facial nerve. So revision case, the chance of the risk of facial nerve injury goes up multifold. Why? Because the facial nerve will be drawn more towards the foot plate area by fibrosis, and then it is very difficult to make out which is the fibrotic band and which is the nerve. So you might injure it. So, and also keep a eye on aberrant facial nerve. Okay, and then uh, this is important. Rule out infection of external and middle ear before venturing into what is it, stepidotomy. So external ear, middle ear infection are relative contraindication. It is not a operation which should be done on an emergency or urgency basis. If there is otitis externa, if there is otitis media, you can treat it and then post the patient after 1 month. So this we have discussed, sorry, last class under local and general anesthesia. This depends on the preference of the surgeon, and also to some extent the patient. Some patients are very apprehensive, so they may not cooperate to you well in local anesthesia. So in that condition, it's better to give GA and do the surgery. Or if the patient is fine, and if the surgeon is also well trained and does the operation in a short period of time, where the local anesthesia lasts, it's well and good, because the bleeding is very less in case of when it is done under local anesthesia. And on table hearing assessment can be done. So Autograft tissue can be used to cover the oval window, including vein, temporalis fascia, perichondrium, and fat. So these things, no, vein, temporalis fascia, perichondrium, were used particularly when you were doing a stapedectomy. But when you are doing a small fenestropedotomy, I think only fat is enough. Only fat is enough to cover the or to seal the what you say, the area surrounding the piston. But always don't think that everything will go on as planned. Sometimes when you are trying to remove the superstructure of the stapes, the whole footplate also might come out. So in those conditions, you should know how to harvest a vein graft and immediately and take a temporalis fascia or perichondrium. Hmm. Exposure, you have to make a tympanomeatal flap. It is totally what you call a endomeatal approach, and in some condition where the canal is very narrow and you are having problem visualizing the full aspect of the tympanic membrane, then you can advise, you can go for a endoral approach, but never post-oral. Post-oral approach is not used for stapes surgery. Not It is not advised, in fact. So the endomeatal is mostly preferred, followed by endoral in certain special situations. And after it's roughly a triangular kind of flap, and after elevation, no, you need to remove the posterior superior bony overhang. Roughly 2 to 4 millimeter of bone should be removed, and you have to be careful about the cauda here and make sure you don't what you say, injure the cauda, because it will work in a different way also. You can take the help of cauda at the end of the surgery, and it can be displaced upward or downward depending on where you are working for the bone removal. And you curate out, ideally some people use a drill, a small diamond drill. If your control is good, and then you can go ahead, but for beginners it is very essential to curate it. So it may be little tough, you may require more force, particularly in males, but uh, curating, you are in lot of control while curating, so you know how much pressure you are giving, because you can feel it in your hand. So curating should be done either from above down or from medial to lateral. So curate till you see the base of the pyramid. So, or the facial nerve canal. So you can very clearly at least demonstrate the fallopian canal, or you can also go right up till the base of pyramidal eminence. Very nicely you can appreciate the stapedius muscle going and attaching onto the neck of the stapes. So a very important, you should keep more time, invest rather more time for exposure, rather than rushing into and doing the fenestra. Don't do that. Take your time, have a good exposure, and then once exposure is adequate, no, the surgery will take less amount of time. And number two is, you the problems, if you face, no, you can tackle it easily. I won't say that you will not face problem, but chances of facing the problem will be less. Number one, if at all you face a problem, you can tackle it easily, because you have done a good exposure of the whole area. Okay. So removal of stapes superstructure, particularly in stapedectomy, first you separate the infudostapedial joint using a angled joint knife, and make a safety hole in the foot plate prior to fracturing the superstructure. So this can be done with perforators. These are small, very fine equipments. So previously the safety hole was not done. So this what happened when the safety hole was not done, no, this led to a floating foot plate. The foot plate floats like a boat on the perilymph. So and then that is again a special headache for you on table, and if you are not well trained enough, you cannot place the piston, and sometimes you are scared and what will happen, and then you leave it. But even though there is a floating foot plate, no, what you do is you can keep a graft like a vein graft or a temporalis fascia graft and put the piston over the floating foot plate. But you have to be trained well enough to do so. So to prevent a floating foot plate, no, you do a safety hole first. Make a small opening in the foot plate area, and then you go with the fracturing of the or separation of the incudostapedial joint, and then removing of the stapes superstructure. So very important. And then you can remove the posterior half of the foot plate, and then you can put the piston. So crura can be shivered using crurotomy scissors, and some also advocate the use of a drill. There are small drills which can be used to drill out. And you remember the anterior crura is thinner and straight, and the posterior crura is thicker and more like a curved one. So, or if you don't have crurotomy scissors, you can just put a gentle pressure on the stapes superstructure with direction in downwards direction. So then what happens ki the superstructure breaks off from the foot plate, and the foot plate remains fixed. So it's very important that while this maneuver of just breaking only the superstructure and preserving the foot plate area, it takes a lot of precise force. You cannot use more, you cannot use less. If you use less, it won't fracture, it won't come out. If you use more, the whole foot plate area may come out. So you have to be careful. Now, you know, the latest one is we're doing a laser stapedotomy. So here you can use a carbon dioxide laser or a argon laser to vaporize the superstructure. So that is the least traumatic. So, but another thing is it generates a little bit of heat, and if you already have a decent nerve, no, this heat may cause thermal damage to the facial nerve, resulting in facial nerve palsy. So even though you are operating using a laser also, the facial nerve palsy should be there, mentioned as a complication. So foot plate removal and creation of fenestra. So three options are available. Either you remove the total foot plate, or posterior half of foot plate removed, or make a small fenestra. So better post-operative outcome in case of small fenestra stapedectomy can be done by laser or using micro pick or micro drill that is size of 0.7 mm. So diameter fenestra is made ideally when a 0.6 mm diameter prosthesis is used. So you see whatever size of prosthesis you select, the next size opening you have to make. But this is in case of other foci of otosclerosis. But if you have a obliterative otosclerosis, then in order to insert a 0.6 mm piston, no, you have to make the opening of 1.2 mm. That is exactly the double. But that is done only in case of obliterative otosclerosis, not in others. So you can see here this is the malleus and this is the incus and this is the stapes. So as I have already told you, don't be prejudiced that there will be only fixation of the foot plate. These all will be working okay. No, you cannot take it for granted. So once you dislocate the IS joint, and then when you, before going into the foot plate area, now you check for the movement of the malleus, the incus separately, and inguinal joint as one unit. So you have to check it. And because see, if there is also some amount of inguinal joint ankylosis, and then you do a stapes opening and come out, there won't be much of hearing gain because already there is ankylosis. So always remember, before putting the piston and coming out of the surgery, it is always advisable to check for movement of the malleus by pushing it gently, pushing it here, and the movement of the incus by just moving the long process or the lenticular process. Here you can see the stapes superstructure is removed. Here only you have the post plate. Sorry, here you have only the foot plate area, and then this is the piston. So you attach the piston to the fenestra made in the foot plate, and you connect the other end to the incus. Okay, or you can also connect it to the lenticular process. So tissue seal of oval window, vein, perichondrium, fascia or gel foam. Gel foam, lot of surgeons use, but I prefer to use fat. Fat is the best thing. With gel foam, what happens is some cases develop granulation because then it's a foreign body, so you develop granulation. So to avoid that, you harvest the fat from the earlobe at the beginning of the surgery, keep it in saline, and then after keeping the piston, there will be some gap all around the piston. That gap you fill it up with the wax, and then you can keep gel foam, wet gel foam all around. So this fat, what it does know, at body temperature it melts and it forms a perfect seal. Even in case of CSF leak also, fat is very, excuse me, fat is also very commonly used. Now prosthesis, there are different type of prosthesis. You have cup piston prosthesis of Sia and Robinson. Robinson prosthesis is made of stainless steel, and the length is measured from under surface of lenticular process to the foot plate, and is usually 4 mm. So then you have the Sia Teflon piston, which we use over here. This attaches to the long process of incus, and the length is measured from the undersurface of long process of incus to the foot plate plus 0.25 mm. So 0.25 mm is additional. You want it to go inside the inner ear, so that their proper transmission of sound occurs. So if it is attached in the lenticular process, there is no need to add 0.25 mm. If you are putting it in the long process, then always measure the distance from the under surface of the long process to the foot plate area. Now, one simple question you might, sir, how will you measure? So because this is a very small structure, how will you measure? So there is a equipment known as a measuring jig, which has a small triangular projections. I think I have it. I'll show it to you. So this jig corresponds to different dimensions. So at 4 mm, there will be one small pointed projection at 4.25 here, at 4.5 here, like that. So they are not the projections are not kept stacked over one another, but they are kept at an angle so that you can easily make out. Then you have the Maggie fish type. So here you have a combination. In fish type, you have the Teflon body and the metal or the stainless steel hook. In Maggie, it is Maggie piston. It is totally stainless steel, and the in the Maggie piston, no, the lower part is scored. That is the 0.25 mm, no, is scored for us to see, so that when you are keeping the piston, you can easily make out whether the piston is in correct position or not. Okay, and the fish type has the body is made up of Teflon, and the hook is made up of stainless steel. Then also you have a house wire prosthesis, which is made up of thin stainless steel wire. So you can see this is the Teflon piston, this is the Robinson piston bucket handle type, and this is used particularly when there is a lenticular process. You can see the lenticular process going into the bucket, and you can put the handle. So you here in this condition, you preserve the lenticular process. But in this, the Teflon also, you remember, has some memory. So you have to open it up here, then insert it into the long process of inkus, and automatically it will close off. No need to crimp it. Now, coming to post-operative care, very important. This is also plays a equally important role in determining the success of the surgery. So, once the surgery is done, if you are doing under local anesthesia, you can appreciate the gain in hearing. You can appreciate the gain in hearing, and then what you do after putting the piston in place, you seal all around with a fact, and then you can use gel foam all around that, and then close slowly, put back the tympanomeatal flap. So make sure there is no tear in the tympanomeatal flap or in the tympanic membrane. So you put it back, and then you can put additional dry gel foam so that the tympanomeatal flap again sticks to the bony posterior meatal wall. Okay, and then pack the ear, and then you shift the patient. So what you advise you do is avoid straining or blowing of nose. So patient should not blow the nose and also should not strain. So for that, what to do is you give some mild laxatives to the patient starting from the day before the surgery, and then whenever the patient has a stimulus to sneeze, you ask the patient to open the mouth and sneeze, so that the pressure over the foot plate area will be less. Avoid lifting heavy loads, avoid flying for 1 to 2 weeks, avoid head bath, diving and swimming. So these are the few post-operative advice which we give, and you call the patient after 2 weeks or a week to see what the condition of gel foam in the external auditory canal, and you can remove the gel foam if they have dried out, or you preserve it till keep it till 1 month. So gel foam automatically melts off after 4 to 6 weeks. So if you want, you can keep it like that. There is no problem. Then next, hearing improvement, definitely the patient will appreciate from day one itself, but the optimum hearing you will get after 3 months to 1 year. In this period, the optimum hearing will come. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Achha. Okay. Then There's no problem with the transmission of sound, na?
No problem, sir.
Okay. So now coming to special problems encountered during surgery. So one I have told you about the floating foot plate. Next is obliterative otosclerosis. So I told you here it's very difficult to make out. So what you do is you start drilling. You start drilling over the foot plate area, and also you drill out the anterior crura and the posterior crura till you get a very nice blue lining. So I told you if you want to introduce a 0.6 mm piston in normal otosclerosis, you can make the fenestra of 0.7 or 0.8 mm. But in case of obliterative otosclerosis, it is exactly the double. If you want to keep a 0.6 mm, 0.6 mm in the diameter of the piston. So 0.6 mm piston, you have to make the fenestra or opening of 1.2 mm. So you have to be careful. Not that easy. Then dehiscent prolapse facial nerve we've all discussed. Fixed incus or malleus. So I told you there are two reasons actually. One is not only the otosclerosis has caused a bony ankylosis of the incudomalleolar joint and incudostapedial joint, that is one, or there may be itself fixation of the malleus, incus, or both. Now, malleus fixation usually what happens occurs in the head of the malleus, where the head is suspended from the tegmen plate by the suspensory ligament. Okay, the head is here. So this undergoes ankylosis and it gets fixed, or it gets fixed in the attic area. What you can do is, in case of the head is only fixed, you can cut or nip off the from the neck. You nip off the malleus from the neck, and you remove the fixed head, and then you can then movement will automatically start. And then you put the stepidotomy and attach the stapes attach the piston to the mobile incus. In some condition what happens, the incus is fixed, so the malleus is moving and the incus is fixed. So here what you do is you dislocate the incudostapedial joint, you remove the incus totally, and then you can go for a total ossicular replacement prosthesis. So the torque again may be of titanium or maybe of what you say, Teflon. So it depends on the choice, but titanium gives a better result, and that is one, and but it is little costly, so everyone can't afford. So fixed incus and fixed malleus should always be checked before before putting the piston. So before we are inserting the piston, you check the individual movement of the ossicle. Just this is the malleus handle now, you just push it up little bit, and if you feel if it is moving freely, then definitely there is no fixation to the of the head of the malleus, and simultaneously you can see the movement of the incus. So you try the other way around, you just take the long process, lift it and see for movement of the malleus. If you are okay, satisfied, then you can go ahead and put the piston, make the opening and put the piston, and then it will work out well. But if you assume that incus is moving without checking, then if it is fixed, then it won't give any benefit to the patient. The next special condition is a perilymph gusher. Perilymph gusher is seen particularly when you have a wide and patent cochlear aqueduct and internal auditory meatus. So this is a very extraordinary situation where the perilymph comes out like anything. So whatever you do know, the patient will end up with permanent hearing loss. So if you are unfortunate enough doing recently you are doing facial sorry auto the stepidotomy, then this is like a very much bad case for you, and it will demoralize you and make you more fearful of doing stapes in future. But in case of a person who has adequate exposure of perilymph of stapes surgery and can anticipate a perilymph gusher, uh, the only way to know is by doing a CT scan, a high resolution CT scan of temporal bone, where you can see a enlarged cochlear aqueduct and internal auditory meatus. So when you get a gusher now, what you do is you immediately tell the anesthetist to raise the head by 30 degree, and then immediately you keep a temporalis fascia and you seal it off. You seal it off and you keep the piston over it and do it if you are confident enough. And then with the head elevated at 30 degree, no, it reduces the pressure. It reduces the pressure. So it is just like a CSF leak. So here perilymph is leaking, there CSF was leaking. So in both the condition, once a head end elevation gives a very good reduction in the pressure. So thereby what happens, the flow comes down or even stops also. So then you can go ahead and complete your surgery peacefully. Although there will be loss, there will be hearing loss, but it won't be a disaster. So then you graft it and close it, and post-operatively also you advise the patient to lie still and with an 30-degree flexion of the head. Head end of the bed should be elevated by 30 degree, and that is one. And in suppose you anticipate no, with the head end elevation also there is still chance of leak, then you can insert a lumbar drain. You can insert lumbar drain for 24 to 48 hours, and then you can remove. So can be anticipated if we are doing HRCT for all cases, which we don't do here. So it may be on table you find out and you take the decision. So if you are unfortunate it is there, then don't do one thing. One thing you should not do is you should not do any suction. That is first foremost thing. It is not the blood, it is perilymph. If you suck it out, then it is a permanent hearing loss. So whatever is coming out, immediately you go for 30-degree elevation, and then in most cases the perilymph gush subsides. Then you have to immediately, if it is a small fenestra, put the piston, seal it around with fat and pack it nicely, uh, if you are confident enough at that stage. Otherwise you can close it. Fracture of long process of incus, that's what I was talking about. If the incus is not mobile, or suppose while you are crimping you fracture the long process of incus, so what you can do is there is a special instrument for torque which can be used, and that can be connected to the malleus handle. The torque can be connected to malleus handle, and that can be and the piston is directly kept over the foot plate area. So you can establish hearing improvement will be there. So this is in regarding stapes surgery, and another one or two things I will tell. One is a perilymph fistula. So fistula, perilymph fistula particularly is seen, these patients will develop vertigo, episodic vertigo, vomiting, and sensory neural hearing loss. So you have, in this condition you suspect, if the patient has initially a good hearing and then is slowly deteriorating and giving history of episodic vertigo, then you have to suspect a perilymph leak. So in that condition, You take the patient for a review to the OT and try to see where the leak is, and don't try to remove the piston, rather try to gently cover the leak and keep the patient under observation for a day or two. And then once the vertigo and leak subside, you can discharge the patient. Then another is a persistent stapedial artery. The persistent stapedial artery runs right over the middle of the foot plate and it causes hemorrhage. So it is rather a not an absolute but a relative contraindication for stapes surgery. Those who are experienced enough, they go ahead and do it. But for a beginner, it is difficult because that area, no, bleeding, if it occurs, then it becomes very difficult to do, because most of the time you are busy sucking the blood out, but then it takes a lot of time, and then slowly your energy level, your glucose level also will be coming down, so that won't help you towards the end when you need more finesse in your fingers. So another is a granuloma. So granuloma can occur with anyone. So even though you have done a fantastic surgery, if you're unfortunate enough, granuloma will present. So how to identify it early is when you see a reddish hue in the posterior superior quadrant after the stapes surgery, that means there is a granuloma. So reddish hue in the posterior superior quadrant. So in that condition, you have to immediately admit the patient and go for re-exploration and remove the granuloma. So once you remove the granuloma now, and do the necessary treatment, they respond well. But provided you intervene little earlier. So uh, these are the few things, special problems encountered during surgery and post-operative care. Any doubt? Any doubt? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Any doubt you have?
No, sir.
Acha, did you get any message from our college regarding reopening of our your classes?
No, sir.
No?
No, sir. We did not get any message.
Acha, acha. No, because there are talks going on here that not only here, throughout India, that colleges are opening from October onwards. No such year has been given to you, na?